Hey everybody, Sean Early here. Welcome to a sunny, beautiful day here in the Wiesbaden Core Park here in Germany. The cherry blossoms are just starting to come out a little bit, and it's really beautiful here in the spring when that happens. So I decided to pick kind of a sunny, cheery, happy place to do a podcast on a pretty heavy topic. I had to take a walk just to kind of get my head together on a keynote speech I watched the other day. I think I recorded this podcast about 3 times now, basically just... I promised myself that I would, when I talk about heavy topics, I will always end on something positive or at least try to offer some advice or some value. So I kept having to redo this because I kept ending on a pretty gloomy note. So I'm going to try to do that at the end of this podcast. But there's a company called Future Today Institute. They are headed up by a woman named Amy Webb, pretty well-renowned futurist, probably I'd say the top futurist, at least the most well-known futurist out there. Every year they do a tech trend report. Amy does a keynote speech at South by Southwest every year, gets a lot of attention, probably one of the best ones out there for tech trends. And as a consultant, I use that as well, sort of as a benchmark for my own trend reporting. I respect their opinion a lot just from what they say, and also a level of professionalism. And so I usually, as a consultant, I tend to, I'm an independent consultant, so I can kind of get away with being a little more flippant, a little bit less careful with the things I say. Maybe it's because I'm a Sagittarius, maybe it's because I'm neurodivergent, but, I tend to just I don't hold back when I have an opinion on things. I kind of just let it fly. And, I think... Again, being independent, I have a little bit more freedom to do that. A company like Future Today Institute obviously has a lot more credibility, a lot more clients, a lot more people who work for them, a lot more liability with commenting on sort of controversial topics. So Amy, in her keynotes, she'll talk about big ideas, but she tends to always kind of bring them back into some sort of reality and some sort of positive, providing value, obviously, on a very professional approach to what they do. This year was a lot different. This year was actually pretty concerning because Amy didn't do this at all. In fact, it was pretty grim in terms of the things she was talking about. So for me, there's a goose fight. For me, on one end of things, it was nice having the validation of knowing the things that I've talked about, at least in my last trend report, were true, were at least confirmed, or at least were valid, and had some weight behind them. On the other end of things, it was a little bit shocking, thinking like, okay, I'm not wrong here in the level of importance and severity in which things are changing. And a big topic of my trend report for 2026 was acceleration. Just things are speeding up like crazy. Things are speeding up so fast, it's almost hard to keep up with them. And things are disrupting and transforming so fast, it's hard to keep up with them. I think it was interesting because Amy opened up her keynote the other day by announcing the death of the trend report. They had a little mock funeral for it. And I've talked about this over the past couple of years, ever since generative AI came out and started really changing big things in big ways, is that, before you do a trend report and, you'd had a 6-month window to do a trend report, usually pretty factual, at least for the first half of the next year. They held their value, and you could pretty much a good predictable window. But these days, trend report is almost impossible to do, even using AI to do the trend report, because things are changing so fast. It's literally like you get a trend report done and the next day something comes out, completely changes it. And it's just a constant hamster wheel of things changing so quickly, you just can't even keep up with it. So the traditional trend report is really just almost impossible to do anymore to be valid, and I felt that for a long time. Future Day Institute kind of just rebranded the trend report, and they're calling it basically a conversion report. So their opinion is basically, all trend reports just they have a bunch of trends for different topics, and they kind of have a summary on, where things were at and now where things are going. And like I said, it's typically easy to just kind of have a lot of things to give people a lot of ideas, and they can sort of pick their direction, and be fairly confident in where things are going. But in terms of conversion report, what they're saying is basically, trends are kind of it's like predicting the weather. It's like a trend is basically like the temperature or the wind speed or something like that. And then all those combined basically create some sort of conversion in terms of what the weather's going to be. And so it's kind of a statement now from Future Today Institute that, again, it's something I've been questioning about myself for a long time. Is like this is the first time in my career as a consultant, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, 25 years, I don't know, I'm that old. But the first time in my career in technology where I honestly really can't tell you where things are going, other than that there are major things coming in the future, and it's big and scary, and there's no way to really predict what's going to happen there, because we haven't been in something like this like ever, at least in modern history. And I'm really questioning my confidence in my ability to be able to predict where things are going as a trend consultant and give people any kind of logical advice. And I think this was a statement kind of from Future Today Institute as one of the leading sort of trend consultant companies out there to say that they really don't know where things are going either, other than big things are coming and you kind of have to position however you can for it. So she's basically saying there are 3 or 4 or 5 big sort of storms coming that are all sort of converging in different places. So, it's all just a series of shit shows. And like I said, typically her keynotes were positive and inspiring. In this case, it was really not. And based on that, I think Amy Webb made some pretty bold statements. I'm not going to go into everything into lots of detail. I'm going to share the link to her presentation in the show notes. But there's a few big sort of silos of convergences she was talking about that were pretty dark and pretty unclear in terms of where to go with that. One thing she was talking about, obviously, is just the very, very obvious decline of the middle-class, white-collar knowledge worker sort of tech job. They've been going away for a long time, and I haven't personally seen any trends to indicate that these jobs are coming back. And so I kind of took a very controversial stance on it for the past couple years in a lot of my content, talking about how I don't think that entire sector is coming back. I don't think those jobs are coming back. And unfortunately, that is a major chunk of the sort of technology workforce has disappeared in the last couple years. It's been happening sort of before the pandemic, but now it's really speeding up. A lot of it has to do with AI, obviously. There's a lot of economics happening right now where companies are downsizing but optimizing because of AI, and as a result they're laying off people left and right. But the economy and their revenue and everything stays up. The productivity of the company stays up, but they lay off a bunch of workers. So the economy is going up, but so is unemployment. And unemployment is a point now where I don't know if you've tried to look for a job lately if you're a tech worker, but it's almost nearly impossible. It's almost nearly impossible to find work doing what most tech workers have been doing as knowledge workers over the past 30 years, especially middle-class, middle-aged professionals. Their skill set is becoming irrelevant. And like I said, it's not coming back. And the thing that shocked me, wasn't surprising, but shocked me sort of as a confirmation, was that Amy Webb basically confirmed that too. She said, I don't think these jobs are coming back ever, because there's no trend indicating a sign that these kind of jobs will ever be needed again, because of AI, because of outsourcing, because of downsizing. A couple days ago, yesterday, day before, I don't remember, Meta just announced they're laying off 20% of their company. 20%. So that's about what they said is about 15,000 jobs. So 15,000 jobs are about to be lost. 15,000 families are about to have that affect them. And that's just one company. We're not talking about, this is something that happens on like a weekly basis. This is the pattern. It's been happening for a while now, and it's not coming back. These companies are being productive with less people using AI and outsourcing. And entire sectors of types of jobs are going away with no replacement. And there's no economic sort of plan to replace that. There's no universal basic income. There's no nothing. So there's just a huge swath of the population of tech workers who are out of work, and they're suddenly faced with having to reskill in mostly labor jobs. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal for me to have that confirmation, obviously, but I think that's a sign that it's not bullshit anymore. It's not just conspiracy. It's not just controversy that's kind of living in people's blog posts and their little social media comments. This is real, and it really, really, really needs front and center attention, I mean, especially in a time where countries are lobbing missiles indiscriminately at each other as their precedents. I think there's a lot more important things like, a huge chunk of the population who's unemployed with no way to get work. A few other big things she talked about. One was AI augmentation, where people are using technology and biotechnology to basically augment themselves and their productivity and their sort of mental capacity and their physical capacity and their productivity. This is a big trend that's been happening for a long time, but it's starting to sort of ramp up to the point where, we've all seen how, jobs that are hiring, quote unquote hiring, if they are hiring, they are requiring a lot more AI skills to be credible, to have, provide value in that position. And what she's saying basically is not just AI skills, but at some point AI augmentation will start being required, because not just in a tech work position, but also probably in a labor position, augmented AI is going to be sort of a mandatory requirement. Based on the trends of where things are going. So, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's slowly happening right now. So, at some point there'll be sort of a cultural divide between the people that can afford to augment with AI and people who can't. And it's not just about learning AI, it's about literally augmenting yourself and the technology and the hardware that you use on a daily basis and how you do your work and how that increases productivity. And so, there's going to be people who can afford that and people who can't. That's going to be a big cultural divide in the job market. Another topic that she brought up, which I thought was interesting, I mentioned it in my last trend report, was the topic of basically outsourced emotions. I don't know if she described it, I'll have to look back in the presentation. But basically, it means that people are using AI for emotional support. So they're using AI as a relationship partner. People are dating AIs. People are using AI for religious purposes. People are using AI. I use AI for strategy, for ideation, to clarify my thoughts. I use it for all kinds of things. But people are actually using AI now for therapy. And something I mentioned just briefly in my trend report as an interesting thing. And when I mentioned it, the numbers were, I think, something like 25% of teens in the UK were using AI for therapy as opposed to using actual people, human therapists. So 25% in the UK, I thought that was a huge number. Amy Webb basically said that it seems like about 50% of all Americans are using AI for therapy. That's insane. 50% of Americans are using AI for therapy in replacement of actual human beings. And, it's understandable. I mean, therapy is expensive. It's kind of a luxury in America. It's hard to get insurance to cover it. It's hard to pay for that. So, of course, it's a cheap solution for sort of an 80-20 sort of therapy. But what that's creating is it's creating an emotional dependency. It's an emotional dependency on these platforms that are also being used for military purposes. So we're creating a dependency, we're creating an addiction for your well-being with these platforms. So as these AI dependencies increase and as the need for the usage of them increase just to maintain productivity in a job, we're going to be forced more and more and more to have to evolve with this stuff. And it's creating a pretty bleak outlook on the future. And I think that, like I said, there's no universal basic income. There's no strategies. There's no plans to fix that, to support the people that can't maintain in that kind of world. What was it? Goldman Sachs, they came out in 2023, basically, with estimates that up to about 40% of the workforce globally will have their jobs replaced with AI by 2030. And whether that number holds true or not, we're heading in that direction. And so how do you prepare for 40% of the global workforce to be irrelevant in their skill set? Not irrelevant, but their skill set is irrelevant. And there's nobody planning for that. There's nobody planning for that. And, it's funny because To end the presentation, Amy Webb had a bold statement, which is typically something I hear a lot in like the manosphere, and the datasphere in TikTok and things like that. Basically saying that no one's coming to save you. And that, like I said, it's something I expect from the sort of tough love manosphere, but when it comes from Amy Webb as a way to finalize a presentation, that's pretty scary. That's pretty serious, and I think we should all take it extremely seriously. That being said, to try to swing this back around to some sort of positive angle, obviously this is a bold statement that I think needs to be much more attention, needs to be paid attention to. Her basic strategy with this presentation was to talk about creative disruption. And, lots of technology disrupts other technology. It's just, that's what happens. But creative disruption is basically a term to say that you take the initiative yourself to disrupt something because change is coming. It has to be drastic, it has to be extreme, and typically it's messy, but in the long term, that's how you pivot to adjust for something as big as, the potential downfall of capitalism globally. It's another thing she's talking about. 40% of the workforce not being able to work globally. That takes a lot of creative disruption, and unfortunately, that's a lot of what these companies are doing with these big layoffs. That's creative disruption, whether you like it or not. And I think that has to be sort of a mantra for you personally, is creative disruption, to really take a look at what you're doing and what you've been doing for work, especially for work in your career, especially if you're middle-aged and you have been working in the tech industry and you are finding yourself either out of work or soon to be out of work and not seeing the future of where your career is going. Then creative disruption is a big thing you need to focus on. Big changes. There's a song that I kind of tease my daughter about. It's called "Hole in the Bucket." There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza, and there's Lizas and there's Henrys, and if you're kind of a Henry type of person, then you should be using AI as your Liza to augment anything you're doing to get the productivity edge on whatever you're doing. If you're a Liza type person, then you should be using AI to become a better, more productive Liza. But this technology is out there. You need to use it to your advantage because everyone else is using it to their advantage. And this isn't stopping, and this is going to cause some major disruptions. It's already causing major disruptions. But I think the sort of, if there's a silver lining to all this, something I've really been gravitating a lot towards and talking a lot about, not because it's trendy, but as sort of a safety blanket for this inevitable outcome of what's going on. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news since this whole Iran thing started, especially this, but it's almost impossible now since that started to check out the news feeds on social media and actually figure out what the hell's going on, because there's so much AI generated content out there. A lot of it isn't intentional, obviously, but there's so much AI generated content out there, it's really almost impossible to figure out what the hell is going on anymore in the world. And I focus a lot on AI content, and I can identify it pretty quickly, but I'm finding myself staring at this stuff thinking is this real or not? And it's only going to increase, and I'm just getting more and more revulsed at AI content. I almost don't even want to open social media anymore because it's just full of it, and it just turns my stomach. But as a flip side to that, what it says to me is that being real, personal branding, being a real person these days is almost your strategic advantage. It's almost, it's the thing that will differentiate quality. And it's already, it's at that point, it's almost past that point. But, just being real, having the conversation like I'm having right now, just talking and sharing a thought from a human being as opposed to just seeing more generated content, I think is so valuable right now. And, the creator economy, despite its ups and downs, it's much more than just the Mr. Beast. The creator economy is so huge and so diverse, and I don't see it slowing down at all. In fact, the projections just keep going up and up. And if you do want something that is predictable, that is reliable in this very unstable, unpredictable future, I can say that at least is one aspect that is going to continue to grow, continue to be rich, continue to be monetizable. So if you are thinking about creative disruption, you're thinking about where you're going in your career, one thing that I highly recommend, and again, I talk about it a lot, is just building your personal brand. It's building a channel. Even if you don't know what you're doing yet, just share your thoughts and feelings, share yourself, and build an audience around that and monetize it later. You know what I mean? Just be real in a world that is increasingly not real and increasingly aggressive in terms of encroaching on everything that we do as our livelihood. That is one predictable thing that we can rely on, is that the creator economy is still valid right now. And, you know, if we suddenly all just start watching more, AI influencers than real people, then I'll be really concerned. I can't say that will or won't happen. I don't know. But, like I said, AI content just kind of, it turns my stomach right now. So watching an AI influencer would be the last thing I'd want to do in my life. But as a safety blanket for that, I'd say that just, real human interaction is one of the most valuable things we can have in the future. And if you are planning any kind of business, even if you're thinking about it doing it in the future, grow your channel. I recently wrote a book on podcasting called The Podcast Business Blueprint. The point of it is not just, hey, start a podcast. The point is basically to monetize yourself, build a business around your channel, and figure out other monetization ways to augment that channel. So, it's really important to, whatever you do as a business, it requires marketing, it requires promotion, it requires an audience, it requires eyeballs, and that's only going to continue to grow. And the value of that is, again, it's invaluable. So again, if I can have any kind of advice on where I do know things are going, that is only going to continue to grow and continue to be more valuable. So really think about your personal brand, think about your own communication channels, think about monetizing yourself, your human presence. I think C to C, client to client, business to client. I think, that's something that AI is not going to replace for a long time. At least I hope it doesn't, but I don't see that happening. So think about that. And, you don't have to be, not everybody's cut out to be an influencer. I get it. It's not about being an influencer. It's really about just building an audience around yourself so that you can launch whatever comes up. I'm dipping my foot in so many things right now because of this instability. I'm consulting. I'm also doing products, writing books, doing creative things. I'm really trying to diversify lots of things, dipping my toe in lots of different things to try to plant some seeds for whatever may be valuable in the future. And as a result, I'm just building a platform around it. I'm building a communication channel. What I'm doing right now is basically just, it's monetizing my humanity, as a benchmark against AI. I haven't cloned myself in AI yet. I hope I don't have to do it. And God, I hope you never have to see that, because I don't want to see it. It turns my stomach. But anyway, that's my advice at this point. I'll link to Amy Webb's presentation in the show notes. I suggest you watch the whole thing and just kind of understand the gravity of it. If you're interested, you could download my trend report for 2026 and just kind of see what I was talking about with very similar things. So at least I know I'm not far off from the benchmark. But to hear Amy Webb put it in such a matter-of-fact way, when she's normally much more light, that's a sign that this is serious, and it really requires a lot of creative disruption on everybody's end. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But again, trying to take a very dark topic and turn it into something light. If you're interested in exploring what creative disruption you can do for you and your business, I offer consulting on that. Reach out and we can have a one-on-one, and I can see if I can help you if you resonate with me. Also check out my book, Podcast Business Blueprint. It has a lot of advice on that topic, and just this podcast and on my social media, I talk about this a lot, and I will continue doing it as I become much more sort of resolute in the reasons why this is so important, because watching that presentation really made it blatantly clear to me that is very important. So be sure to subscribe and follow on all your channels to this podcast. Like and share to everybody. Go buy my book, buy 1,000 copies and share it with everybody. That will help me a lot. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.